On today's show, why the Houston Rockets should be viewed as legitimate threats in the Western Conference playoffs this season, how Jalen Green has earned the benefit of the doubt as the number one scorer on the 2 seed in the Western Conference. Plus, we take a look at the final stretch of games for the Rockets, and is the NBA play-in tournament flawed? All of that on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Also check out our Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate all of that support. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, I wanted to take take a beat to kind of address some of the naysayers, the doubters, when looking at this Houston Rockets team as we approach the playoffs. And I guess I understand some of the criticism surrounding this Rockets team. They're young, they're inexperienced, they don't have a true, like, tier 1 superstar kind of guy yet. So I understand some of those concerns, and I myself have voiced many of those concerns this season, but I feel like we have a large enough sample size, a large enough body of work of what this Houston Rockets team has done this year to consider them legitimate threats in the playoffs. They're not some plucky team that just got lucky this season. They have a backbone and an identity that will absolutely carry over from the regular season into the postseason. And I'll admit, some of this conversation was inspired by, and this discussion that we're going to have over at least these first couple segments is inspired by our NBA squad show that we do each week, where we get a bunch of the NBA hosts from the East and Western conferences together and kind of talking about the lay of the land of the NBA. And in the most recent Western Conference squad show, the guys talked a little bit about the Houston Rockets, and I unfortunately wasn't there to rep the Rockets in that squad show. And a lot of the guys were kind of down on the Rockets and their chances in the playoffs. And unfortunately, I just, a month or two ago, I would have understood, right? Rockets were sitting at the 2 seed and they were having a very surprise season. And I think that we're fast approaching the end of the year, and they have largely cemented themselves and proven that they're not just the 2 seed. They have consistently, over almost an entire season now, been the second best team in the Western Conference, trailing only the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I'm not the only one that believes that. The Rockets are actually getting some national media love from none other than Carlos Boozer, of all people. Let me run this clip back really quick.
So when you look at the West in its entirety, Booze, I don't know who is the second best team. The Rockets are number 2, but who is the second best team, Booze, in the Western Conference?
Everybody wants to talk about Denver Nuggets, the Lakers, the Clippers, and even the Warriors. But I'm going right there in H-Town with Houston. I think they got a star in Alperen Sengun. He's a 20-10-5 guy. Baby Jokic, I like that big perk. He's just like Baby Jokic. Does a great job. Jalen Green has turned himself into a both sides of the court guy. He can play defense and he can score. He can put up 30 a night if he had to. He's averaging 22 right now. They got some veteran guys to go with this young core, and Van Fleet, Dillon Brooks locking up. They got Thompson and Jabari Smith Jr. This team is quietly just going about their business. They've won 9 out of 10. They lock teams up. They can score with anybody. And guess what? They're young. Young teams that are this talented are dangerous in the playoffs.
So first things first, for any of my somewhat older Rockets fans, my first inclination is to immediately disregard anything Carlos Boozer ever has to say about anything, because he tormented the Rockets in back-to-back postseason performances when he was with the Utah Jazz. But Boozer's spitting facts. He is. This Rockets team is young. They're hungry. And I mentioned it earlier. They have a backbone. They have an identity. And that identity will absolutely 1,000% translate to the playoffs. They're not some team that built their success on having a high-octane offense and outscoring other teams. We've seen that recipe try and fail previously, where teams that come out of the gate and they have a top 10, top 5 offense, top 3 offense, but they have no semblance of a consistent defense whatsoever, and they strictly rely on being able to outscore their opponents. Those teams crash and burn in the postseason. Defense translates. The Rockets have been one of the NBA's best defenses all season long. They're currently sitting at 4th best defense in the NBA. But it's not just that. It's the other little things that this Rockets team does on a night in, night out basis that will translate in the postseason. The defense is there. The rebounding is there. That's a really important thing. And they're the best offensive rebounding team in the NBA. They're the best second chance points team in the entire NBA. And yes, their offense is more often than not propped up a little bit by the fact that they crash the offensive glass so hard, but they not only do they manage to crash the offensive glass hard, they're not sacrificing other parts of their defense. It's sometimes really hard to attack the offensive glass and still be a good transition defense team. The Rockets managed to do both. The Rockets managed to be one of the best transition defenses in the entire NBA, while also still attacking the offensive glass with Steven Adams and Sengun and Tari, Jabari, Thompson, whoever it is, right? They take care of the basketball. They don't commit tons of turnovers, mostly because they just don't really move the basketball around a lot, which is one of the unfortunate side effects of what Ime Udoka has decided to do schematically with this Rockets offense. There's not a ton of ball movement. There isn't a ton of player movement, outside of just the occasional little flare screen or something like that, or relocating on the perimeter. But it's primarily just giving the ball to Sengun and letting him go to work, give the ball to Jalen, give him a screen, let him get downhill, 1 or 2 passes, swing the ball around the perimeter, find a shooter, that kind of thing. There's not really a ton of movement or a ton of advanced passing taking place. So turnovers are generally pretty rare for this Rockets team. And when you look at the body of work from this season in particular, against teams over 500, the Rockets are 27-7 this year. And they've had incredible big wins throughout this season, right? Beating the Cavs, beating the Celtics, they've beaten the Lakers, they've beaten the Nuggets, they've beaten the Thunder, they've beaten so many good teams this year. And yeah, some of those teams weren't 100% healthy. Like, you can make all sorts of arguments in the book, but at the end of the day, I think this Rockets team they're going to be doubted because they're young. Absolutely. And that's just what happens, right? Until you prove it in the playoffs, fans, analysts, talking heads, national media guys, they're all going to cast doubt on this team and on this organization until they prove something in the playoffs. But I think the confidence meter for Rockets fans should honestly be through the roof, because despite some of the offensive struggles that we've seen from this team this year, they have won a ton of games. They've been dominant for most of the season. They have an identity that will work incredibly well, and they've been one of the most clutch teams in the NBA this year. They have the most clutch wins of any other team in the association, 25-15, I believe, in the clutch this year. And that number actually gets even better when Fred VanVleet plays. He's 21-10 in the clutch for the Rockets this season. So when Fred is out there and he's able to, kind of calm things down at the end of the game, the Rockets actually do pretty well. So, and a couple of those clutch losses came at the hands of the Brooklyn Nets during that little 6-game losing streak. So I understand some of the doubt being cast on the Rockets, but at the same time, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this Rockets team will be able to make some noise in the playoffs. And I'm talking noise, not just winning a first-round series. I'm talking we could be staring down the barrel of a Thunder Rockets Western Conference Finals, because there isn't a singular team in the West outside of the Thunder that really, I guess, strikes fear in me. If I were looking at, matchups specific to the Houston Rockets and how they match up with each team down the line after the Thunder are concerned, So that's just kind of where I'm sitting. But the biggest piece of the puzzle in all of this is Jalen Green and what he will look like in the postseason. And I want to talk about why Jalen Green has earned the benefit of the doubt at this point for his performance this year. And we're going to talk about that in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Look, I'm Houston born and bred. I went to the University of Houston. I am a Cougar through and through, so you know I'm pulling for my UH Cougs throughout the tournament. They're going to beat Purdue. I know it's a neutral ground in Indiana, and it's going to be a packed house of Boilermakers, but I think the Cougs are going to still come out on top. That's who I'm putting money on. If you want to get in on the action, though, there's tournament games happening pretty much every single day. The app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so one of the other areas of conversation for the guys doing the NBA squad show was centered on Jalen Green. And understandably, because he's the key for this Rockets team. For them to have a successful postseason, they need Jalen Green to play at the best of his ability. If Jalen Green struggles offensively in the postseason, if he's not able to put up the numbers that he's been putting up pretty consistently now for a while for this team, then they don't have a dynamic perimeter scoring option that can help balance the offensive workload alongside Alperen Sengun. Now, maybe there's a game or two where Fred VanVleet gets incredibly hot, right? And then when Fred is knocking down shots at the rate that he was, earlier this season against the Thunder when he dropped 38 or when he dropped 39 against the Miami Heat, like when he's doing stuff like that, then it's, did he drop 39 against the Heat? 37, whatever it was, 9 threes against the Heat. When Fred's playing like that, then Jalen's able to take a night off, right? But by and large, that responsibility of being the heavy hitter perimeter scoring threat is Jalen's job. He is effectively the lead guard for this Rockets team. The ball is in his hands even more than it's in Fred's hands at this stage of this Rockets season and how they're utilizing those two guys in particular offensively. But the conversation I felt like wasn't, and again, I wish I could have been there to dispel some of this stuff, but the guys were talking about March Jalen Green, right? And it has been a phenomenon, right? Jalen played out of his mind last March. He's been really solid this March, but Jalen, when you look at his entire body of work, right, he's actually had a really, really strong season. Outside of that really bad November, his season has been incredibly solid pretty much across the board. And coming from one of his biggest doubters, naysayers, hater, if you will, I had serious concerns and doubts, right? But I think that at least through the end of this season, whatever the postseason looks like for this Rockets team, Jalen Green has absolutely earned the benefit of the doubt. He's earned my confidence and my trust in kind of how he's played up to this point. And yes, you can still look at some things, like you can look at some of the efficiency metrics, or you can look at his true shooting percentage. His efficiency is still not quite where you'd like it to be. And so there are some that would still want to label him inconsistent. And I kind of get it, but I think there's a different word that I'd prefer to use when talking about Jalen, and they're synonymous to an extent, right? Reliability. Jalen has been incredibly reliable this season for the Rockets. When it feels like you need a bucket, when it feels like you need scoring, when it feels like you need a play to be made or to collapse the defense or to draw some free throws, Jalen has been that guy for a lot of this season. He's been in crunch time situations and knocked down big shot after big shot this year. He has ironed out his consistency, right? Where on a night-to-night basis, last season there were entire games where Jalen just felt like he got completely shut out and made basically no impact, right? Where if he wasn't scoring the ball, then he wasn't facilitating, he wasn't rebounding, he was defending at an adequate level, right? This year, it feels like he's leveled up all those other areas, right? Where one, it's rare that he gets completely shut out of a game, right? He might struggle for a quarter or two, but every player does. And oftentimes star players do struggle, right? These players are the ones with all the defensive attention being focused their way. Jalen often draws the best perimeter defender from the opposing team, and oftentimes he's drawing, multiple sets of eyes, double teams sometimes where they're forcing the ball out of his hands, right? Opposing team game plans are explicitly being designed to stop and slow down Jalen Green on a night-to-night basis. And he's handled that about as well as you could hope for this season outside of that month of November, right? And his season has just gotten like increasingly better since the month of November, to where I think that genuinely he's earned the benefit of the doubt in that. I'm excited to see the Rockets obviously close out the season strong, hopefully, and we'll talk about the final stretch of 9 games here in just a moment, but also seeing what he's going to look like in the playoffs, right? And I really do think that extended stretch, that extended absence for Fred VanVleet, where Jalen had to become the primary facilitator and lead guard for this team, essentially by necessity, was a really important opportunity for him to settle further into that role. Because at the end of the day, that was the hope, that was the aspiration for this Rockets team when they signed Fred VanVleet, is that he wouldn't be the guy pulling all the strings. He wouldn't be the guy conducting the offense 24/7. He would be a guy that could, in time, slide into more of an off-ball role and allow Jalen, or down the line, Amin Thompson, right, to take over the offense and really run the show. And now we're seeing a Jalen Green. We're seeing an offense for this Rockets team that is largely being run and handled a lot more by Jalen Green than it is by Fred VanVleet on a night-to-night basis, with Jalen as the primary handler. But his ability to generate his own shot, his ability to make his teammates better, his ability to defend both ways, like Booz said in the clip that I played earlier, right? He has become an impactful player in a bunch of different metrics, to where at the end of the day, and it's not like empty calorie scoring, right? It's not like his scoring doesn't translate to winning. The Rockets are literally 11-1 when Jalen Green scores 30 or more. And that number, plus all the other numbers that I highlighted in segment 1, they've got the Rockets have a bona fide, tier 1 level scorer on their hands. And especially recently, the last month or so, it feels like Jalen has had moments where the game has really felt like it's slowing down for him, where he really understands how to use pace, how to, instead of just attacking full speed, right, how to initiate contact, how to force the issue at the rim, how to finish through contact, all these different things that are going to help him tremendously in the playoffs once the Rockets get there. And if you've got Jalen going bucket for bucket with an Anthony Edwards or a Kawhi Leonard or a Steph Curry or whoever the Rockets may be matched up with in the first round of the playoffs, then the other guys just need to do their jobs, right? That's Jalen's job. Jalen's job is to go out there and put up 20, 25, or 30 a game and match the other team and basically negate the other team's best scorer. And ideally, he does it on decent efficiency, right? I'm not talking 30 points on 30 shots, but at the end of the day, too, that's the benefit of the Houston Rockets identity, is they've got a defense that's going to be able to slow other teams down. They've got a defense that's going to be able to muck up games and turn it into a rock fight and have these low scoring affairs where, as long as you've got a guy that can go out there and get you a tough bucket or two when you need it at the end of a game, then the Rockets are going to be in a good position to knock out anybody in the playoffs. Doesn't matter who they get matched up with in the first round. And I'm pretty confident about their chances against whoever they draw in the first round. I'm also pretty confident about whoever they face in the second round, assuming they stay in the 2 seed. And again, we're talking about a timeline where it feels like the Rockets could very realistically be threats to make it all the way to the Western Conference Finals as early as this postseason. They don't have to have a playoffs. They don't have to go through a losing postseason. They don't have to, have their hearts shattered in the first round or come up short in the second round to be able to win at the highest level. They're able to do it right now. And I think they've proven that time and time again this season. They're a team that has absolutely risen to the level of their opponent. They also play down to the level of their opponent sometimes, which is an interesting dynamic at play. But one of the other things that I saw too that was so interesting when I was looking at some of Jalen's numbers from this season is the splits when he's resting. And I didn't have a chance to look up which opponents these games actually happened against, but on 3 or more days of rest, the Rockets have played exactly 5 games on 3 or more days of rest. Jalen's averaging almost 30 a game on 68% true shooting on 3 or more days of rest. Keep in mind, Jalen has been the one guy who's played every single game this year for the Rockets, hasn't missed a single game, has battled through multiple different injuries, little knick-knack bruises, nagging stuff, whatever, the hand injury that he's checking every single game. You see him tweaking his hand, making sure it's okay every single game, every other possession, it feels like. He's had the banged up knee, all that stuff. When Jalen gets rest, his numbers are like MVP level, apparently. And I would need to go back and see what 5 teams those games happened against in particular. But the one benefit about the postseason, right, is you don't play back-to-backs in the playoffs. And there are, because of scheduling and stuff sometimes for the postseason, there are some weird little gaps at times where you get like 2 days of rest or 3 days of rest or whatever while they're scheduling and making sure the schedule lines up the way they need it to in the first round, second round, all that stuff. And so I think that bodes incredibly well for Jalen and by extension for the entire Rockets team, a team that needs to play with so much energy and hustle and physicality and all the things that are kind of demanding of, it's exhausting playing this Rockets style of basketball. It really is. And that's why I think at times we've seen the defense slip a little bit, because it's a really tiring brand of basketball to play, especially when you're dealing with back-to-backs and travel and all that stuff. But in a playoff series, in a 7-game series where you're not worried about traveling, where you've got days off in between games, where sometimes you've got multiple days off, in fact, in between the next game, that's going to help the Rockets and Jalen considerably. So color, maybe I'm just, a mega optimist at this point, but I don't think the Rockets and I don't think Jalen Green should be receiving anywhere near the level of doubt that they are from other fans, from other analysts, and it's going to be really exciting. But at the same time, being the underdog is always fun, right? Rockets going into whatever playoff series they go into, people are going to be expecting them to flame out. They're not going to be expecting what they see in the postseason if they haven't been paying attention all season long. And so it's going to be a nice little coming out party for this Rockets team when they walk into the postseason and surprise some people with how capable they actually are this year. Not next year, not down the line, but this year. This is a team that's capable of making a Western Conference Finals run. Make no mistake about it. Coming up, I want to talk about the remaining schedule for the Houston Rockets. 9 games left, as well as, is the NBA play-in tournament inherently flawed? We're going to talk about that in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so Rockets have 9 games left on the schedule, and a few of these seem like potentially easy wins. So of the 9 games left, they do have a little bit of a gauntlet in there, unfortunately. They've got 2 against Utah, so they're getting ready to play against Utah Thursday night. Then they've got 1 more at home against Utah on Wednesday, April 2nd, and they've got another home game. I don't know why I'm going out of order. Let me just do this. They're on the road for Utah, and then they've got a back-to-back Phoenix, and then the Lakers. Utah and Phoenix should be wins, although the Phoenix Suns are still trying to hold on for that final play-in spot in the Western Conference. So they have no reason to not play hard in that game, and the Rockets have even more incentive to beat the Suns at least one more time in order to increase the value of that Suns pick that they own in this year's NBA draft. So Utah and Phoenix should be wins. The Lakers are an interesting one because the Lakers are still reintegrating LeBron James after his extended absence. And let's be honest, even though the Lakers got that win against the Pacers the other night, LeBron looked really rough. He looked really rusty. And yeah, he got the tip in and the buzzer beater and all the love and praise for that. But he looked really rough in that game. And the Lakers are a team that thrive in getting out and running in transition, igniting fast breaks, and their defense is very porous at times. So that should be a game where the Rockets should be favored, right? If they can limit those transition opportunities. And if LeBron is still a little rusty, yeah, Luka has a thing and loves to cook the Rockets, but I think the Rockets should be okay against the Lakers. And they've got two more games against the Lakers, both in LA, unfortunately. And those games are going to be big as far as continuing to maintain separation between where the Lakers currently stand in the standings as the 4th seed, and only 2 losses back in the loss column. So Lakers have 28 losses right now. Rockets have 26 losses. They're currently a game and a half ahead of the Denver Nuggets, holding on to that 2 seed. Then they come home. They deal with the Utah Jazz again. Should be a win on paper. And this is the interesting one. They've got the OKC Thunder Friday, April 4th. That game might actually just be a game that the Thunder completely punt on, because the Thunder have no incentive to push for more wins, to push for more accolades, whatever. They've kind of been missing some guys up and down their roster and, maybe strategically resting certain guys here or there. It'll be interesting to see how they approach that game. It would be great for the Rockets if they just decided to rest everybody and gave the Rockets a freebie win that night. But we'll see what ultimately happens, especially considering the last time the Rockets played the Thunder, the Rockets gave OKC a freebie win, although Reed Shepherd absolutely popped off in that game. It was a ton of fun. And then they still managed to go on and win and lose the next night to Indiana, even though they rested the entire roster against OKC. That was a ridiculous strategic nightmare for the Rockets. And then they swing back out west where they deal with Golden State, the Clippers, and the Lakers. Little California road trip, and then they come back home to close things out against the Denver Nuggets. In a weird way, this is actually kind of cool because all these games, this entire gauntlet the Rockets have to face, all these games mean something because every single one of these teams outside of the Utah Jazz and the OKC Thunder, they're all jockeying for playoff positioning. And the most important game is likely going to be that final game of the regular season against the Denver Nuggets, because that will probably be the game that decides ultimately who stays in the 2 seed and who drops down to 3 or potentially even 4th seed in the West. So all of these games have pretty high stakes as far as the Rockets are concerned and being able to hold on to that 2 seed. But it's also doubly important because they're going to be kind of little mini previews of what each one of these teams could present as far as a potential playoff series opponent, a 7-round series opponent, or a 7-game series opponent, I should say. And so getting a nice little look at each one of these teams at the end of the season, as these teams are all hoping to be playing their best brand of basketball and trying to get things, fine-tuned and ironing things out and tightening rotations and stuff heading into the postseason. It'll be nice to get some of that stuff on tape before the playoffs actually start, because it's always frustrating when you play a team and you get all the games against a team out of the way, like in the first 3 or 4 months of the season, and you haven't seen a team since before the trade deadline. And suddenly you've got this new iteration of a team that you have no idea what they look like or how they play or how to scheme or how any of your guys look against their guys. And that at least won't be the case for the Rockets against the Warriors, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and even potentially the Thunder, as far as how these things are playing out, and maybe even the Phoenix Suns, if they manage to squeak out of the Western Conference play-in tournament and earn potentially the 7th seed and line up with the Rockets in the 2 seed department. But that's just a quick overview of the rest of the schedule. And I'll be completely honest, I like the Rockets' chances on any given night against some of these teams, but I do worry that some of these teams might be, I don't want to say hungrier, but maybe a little bit more desperate in vying for their playoff positioning than the Rockets currently are. Maintaining the 2 seed is everything. I think the Rockets have got to try and hold on to that 2 seed, and that would be a major, major accomplishment for this season, to walk away the 2 seed and basically guarantee yourself home court advantage against any team in the Western Conference playoffs outside of the OKC Thunder. And the reason for that is that the Rockets this season have won, they're 27-11 at home. They've done a great job taking care, or I guess protecting home court essentially, right? They're 20-14 on the road. So they're not horrible on the road, but it's just one of those things where you'd much rather a young team be in the comfort of their own gym. And if things came down to a game 7, right, for all the marbles, you'd rather play that game on your own turf than be, in a hostile environment competing against another team down the line. So I do want to spend a brief moment here, and at least because I thought this was such an interesting discussion point, in that it feels like the play-in tournament's kind of wonky. And what I mean by that is, think back to when the play-in tournament was originally introduced, and it was brought about with the idea that, well, it was introduced, I should say, first. It was introduced during the bubble season, right? And when they first did the play-in tournament that year, it only applied to the teams that were within range of the postseason to begin with, right? So like out east, the play-in tournament did not apply to, what was it? Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I'm not mistaken, there was no play-in tournament out east, I don't think. But there was a play-in tournament out west, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm misremembering this. But essentially, looking at the lay of the land, looking at the play-in tournament right now as it presently stands, the teams in 9th and 10th place in the Western Conference are so far behind the 7th and 8th seeded teams that it almost feels, in a way, disrespectful to allow the Kings, the Suns, or even the Mavericks or the Blazers, if they go on some kind of crazy run here at the end of the season. It feels rude to allow those teams to basically drag ass through the regular season and squeak in as the 9th or 10th seed, and then all you have to do is win 1 or 2 games in order to guarantee yourself a playoff spot. I feel like the NBA needs to adjust how the play-in tournament is decided, rather than it being just a blanket, okay, whoever 7 through 10 is in the West, regardless of standings, regardless of record, you're in the play-in tournament, period. I feel like that needs to be adjusted to where the teams trailing, so the 9th and 10th seeded teams, need to be within a certain range in order to trigger the play-in tournament. And I feel like that would make it much more exciting. And they could do that in a variety of ways. Maybe they make it where simply you've got to be within 3 games of because right now, look, the Kings are 5.5 games back of the Wolves for the 8th seed. And the Suns are 6 games back of the Wolves, half a game back of the Kings. Like, they are so far removed from the actual 1 through 8 playoff picture that it just feels messed up that either of those two teams would get a legitimate shot at earning the 7th, potentially even the 7th seed, right? 7th or 8th seed in the West, when they really didn't earn it, right? They're both below 500 right now, which, as a quick aside, pisses me off that the Rockets played 41-41 basketball last year and they missed the play-in tournament. Meanwhile, you've got 2 teams that are playing below 500 basketball right now, and they're sitting comfortably in the play-in tournament, so that's kind of stupid. But I think you could do one more wrinkle, and I think this wrinkle would be really hard to tabulate and figure out, and however the NBA would have to set this up, I don't know, but a passing idea that I had is you could set it up to where not only would you need to be within, a certain game, right? Let's just say 3 games back at a minimum, or within 3 games back of the seeds in front of you to trigger the play-in tournament. But not only that, because that would incentivize the teams that are vying for a play-in spot, so the teams in 9th and 10th place, that would incentivize them to keep winning, but it would also incentivize seeds 6, 7, 8 to continue winning so that they don't allow the play-in tournament to be triggered in the first place, right? So it would keep the games competitive throughout the entire year, or especially at the end of the year. But the other angle that I was considering, and I thought this was interesting, and I'm curious your thoughts, so tell me if I'm completely off base here, if it sounds like a good idea, a crazy idea, whatever. You could maybe factor in something like potentially like tiebreakers into things where if the team that you would potentially line up with in the play-in tournament, so let's say right now, for example, the Kings would need to be within 3 games of the Timberwolves to trigger the play-in tournament for the 7-8 slot, right? And like, let's say, for example, if the Suns are too far behind in the standings, then maybe the play-in tournament only triggers for the 8-9 seeds, and the 7th seed is guaranteed a playoff spot if the play-in tournament only applies for the 9th seeded team, something like that. But then whoever's there in the 8-9 matchup, so in this example, we'll use Timberwolves Kings, but pretending that the Kings are closer to the Wolves than 5.5 games back. You could also have another added incentive be the play-in tournament does not get triggered unless your team has at least one win against whoever the team is that would be in the play-in tournament against you. So in this case, if the Kings had gotten swept by the Timberwolves in the regular season, then the Timberwolves would avoid the play-in tournament. It's like, hey, no, you beat this team 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, whatever it was. You beat them 3 or 4 times. You swept them. We're not gonna give them a chance to knock you out of the playoffs because you dominated them in the regular season. Or you could take it a step further and you could basically be like, no, you have to have split the season series. You could do all sorts of head-to-head tiebreakers that would either trigger or not trigger the play-in tournament. But I think if you got a little bit more, and maybe the NBA doesn't want to do that because it'd be all kinds of confusing trying to track who's doing what, and are you in the play-in tournament, are you not in the play-in tournament, whatever. But I think it would add some excitement. And I think it would also really force teams to heavily weigh every game, right? It would actually put some weight on those early season games, because not only are you looking at things like, oh, well, that game back in November that the Rockets won against, the Nuggets or whatever, like that, you're looking at that as an important game for the tiebreaker against Denver now here at the end of the regular season. Did they win against the Nuggets in November? Maybe I'm mixing up, whatever. But point being, you start adding some weight to those early season games, because if you're looking at a team and thinking, you know what, that could be one of the teams that we're fighting against for a play-in spot, we absolutely need to win that game, because otherwise we might not qualify for a play-in spot. So that's just potentially a harebrained idea that I had for potentially fixing the play-in tournament. But again, it feels a little flawed. It feels like the Kings and Suns really shouldn't be in the play-in tournament picture, given the wide gulf between where they're at and where the Timberwolves and Warriors are at currently as the 7th and 8th seeds. So I'm curious your thoughts. Do you think there's anything wrong with the play-in tournament? How would you fix it up? What do you think about the doubters and the naysayers for the Houston Rockets team? How confident should this Rockets team be going into the postseason? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Also, check out our Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.